Hello, everyone. Welcome to TDWI's webinar program. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Linda Briggs. I'm a TDWI contributing editor, and I'll be your moderator. Our program today is entitled Accelerating the Path to Value with Business Intelligence and Analytics. Our presentation today is based on a best practices report by David Stoddard, who is our speaker today and is TDWI's Senior Research Director for Business Intelligence. You can download a copy of the report. I want to let you know, which is free and can be shared freely with your colleagues at tdwi.org. There's a lot more information on today's topic in that report, so we encourage you to do that as well. Before I turn the stage over to Dave, just a couple background items. First of all, today's webinar will be about an hour long. At the end of Dave's presentation, we've set aside some time for audience questions. So if you have a question for Dave at any time during his presentation, please do go ahead and type your question in and send it over. We'll get to as many of those as we can. If you encounter any technical difficulties during the webinar, there's a help area there below your slide window. If you're a Twitter user and you'd like to discuss this webinar on Twitter, please include the hashtag TDWI. Finally, if you'd like a copy of today's presentation, there is a line for that on your console. Click here for a PDF. You can download a PDF immediately. In addition, as always, we're recording today's webinar. We'll be emailing each of you a link to the archived version so you can view the presentation again, or please feel free to pass that link along to colleagues. Okay, once again, our program today is Accelerating the Path to Value with Business Intelligence and Analytics. Our speaker today is David Stoddard. Dave is Senior Director of TDWI Research for Business Intelligence. In that capacity, he focuses on providing research-based insights and best practices for organizations implementing BI, analytics, data discovery, data visualization, performance management, and related technologies and methods. He's been a thought leader in these areas for over 2 decades. Previously, Dave headed up his own independent firm and served as VP and Research Director with Ventana Research. He's the founding chief editor of Intelligent Enterprise, where he also served as editorial director for 9 years. So good to have you back, Dave. Let me get out of the way, turn things over to you.
Thanks very much, Linda, and thanks to everyone who's joining us today on this webinar. Really happy to have you here and to cover our just published best practice report material. So this is always a big deal for TDWI to publish a best practice report and to present it to you. So today we're going to talk about accelerating the value of business intelligence and analytics, which I'm sure comes down to it is a major goal. So let's see. Also want to just start off by thanking our sponsors. We had some great sponsors for this report, and they included Cambridge Semantics and Looker and ModeMetric and SAP. Those are 4, and then we also have 4 more. Tableau, SaaS, Unify, and Zoom Data. So these are all, obviously very interesting and important vendors in this space, so thank you very much for their sponsorship. Okay, so let's look at an agenda. I do have a lot of material to cover today, and I'll try to keep on moving through it so we can get it done in the time we have today. So I'll talk a little bit about the report and just give some background about that, and then look at some of our key topics, the imperative for realizing value from data, the different perspectives on what that means, because obviously it means something different to different people. And then the key issue really around reducing time to value, whether organizations are making a commitment to improvement and what that means and we can look at current satisfaction with BI and analytics as kind of an indicator of where organizations are and need to go to improve. And a key issue of understanding the downstream impact. I'll talk more about that later. And then we'll move into sort of taking action, what kind of things organizations can do, what we're seeing in our research that organizations are doing. Talk about the importance of governance, particularly as things get more democratized. That's very important. Some of the technology strategies. And then I'll close with some recommendations, and we'll leave some time for audience Q&A. Okay, well, look, so about the best practice report, I'm sure many of you have heard a few of our presentations and have read our reports. I hope so. We do reports on a lot of different topics, as we can see here with the recent best practices report topics. My colleague Philip Russum recently published one on data lakes, and my colleague Fern Halper, wrote one on data science and big data. So we've published those this year, and we've had also in BI Analytics in the Cloud. Last year, around this time, I published with focus on the topic of data preparation, improving data preparation for business analytics. And then we also did one about operationalizing and embedding analytics for action. So what we're trying to do with these is education. That's really the primary goal of where our research is headed. How can we help technical and business professionals look at new technologies, develop a strategy, understand the concepts, and see what best practices are, and particularly things that we can share from our research. A key centerpiece is the survey. So I want to thank everyone who's on this presentation call and others who participated in the survey. That's incredibly valuable to us and allows us to gather all that data, analyze it, and then really feed it back to the TDWI community so professionals can see what their peers are doing and understand a better sense of trends, where we are today, where we're going to go in terms of looking at user organizations. So it's a really great thing. So thank you very much for participating in that. And so you can see we cover lots of different topics. We also do a lot of interviews with user organizations and technology experts, including members of the TDWI faculty, and develop cyber case studies. So I'll be talking about those a bit in this report. And, of course, the big result is this report that we just published. It's 30-plus pages. Usually I think this one's more like around 38. And we do the webinar, which we're doing, of course, today, and other presentations, infographics, blogs, social media, all that kind of stuff that we do with content to discuss it over the next 12 to 18 months. So it's a big deal. And so why did we do this report? Looks like we have a little bit of type over. Sorry about that. So why do a report on this topic? Well, I think, one is that organizations are very focused on trying to gain value from their data and from BI and analytics. They want organizations want more of their decisions to be informed by data and analytics. That's really a major issue right now in organizations, is they want to be data-driven or analytics-driven or data-informed, lots of different ways of putting it. But in any case, they want data and the ability to analyze data to play a bigger role, not just in strategic decisions, but in operational decisions. And so there's a lot of pressure to reduce delays, bottlenecks, inadequacies in the technology in BI data management and analytics processes, because it's no longer things that are going on as kind of test projects or kind of almost academic kind of research, but really these are things that are going to be driving strategy and operations. So this means that business stakeholders who are more in direct touch and want to be more in direct touch with the data and analyzing are becoming less patient with delays. They want time to value to be reduced. They want to have value sooner, and that can mean a lot of different things, which we'll talk about. So the other risk is that they'll pursue options that are outside of IT managed systems. I say risk, sometimes that's a good thing, to get self-service going, to bring more value to the data within a department or within a business function or a subsidiary. There's a lot of good to that, which we'll also discuss in this report. But obviously there are other issues in terms of governance and IT's performance and systems management, the things that IT can do that really users can't do, the perspective that an enterprise IT organization can have that's very important. So what ends up happening, of course, is a lot of disparate data and data silos, and that becomes an issue. The technologies and methods are maturing. That's another reason to look at it, is that the vendors are developing solutions that support this approach to getting newer, faster value, more flexible BI, so it's not rooted in kind of one purpose for BI data management and analytics. So it's good to be observing the technology and where it's headed. So what we're trying to do here, as I kind of mentioned on the last slide with all of our reports, is we're going to examine user organization experiences and satisfaction levels and develop best practices through the research and provide recommendations there. With data preparation and BI, I should list all the others, BI, data management and other things, and how the new technologies are shaping or could potentially reshape strategy. So just to take a quick look at our methodology and demographics, again, it looks like some reason in the transfer of type to the format we're using for these slides. I hope this isn't a continuing problem. It may be, but I'll try to help us through this here. So what we did, as I mentioned, the survey plays a big role. So in March of 2017, we sent out email invitations. We did get back 230 responses. It was a pretty extensive questionnaire, so I appreciate, again, everyone who went all the way through it. I know it was a long questionnaire and sometimes very complicated, which probably kept our numbers down a little bit. But we did get 224 fully completed survey responses, and you can see here quite a variety of demographics, so it was a good result set, getting organizations that are all across the spectrum for us to look at. And so we had, in terms of respondents' positions, the large percentage were in the executive ranks, so we had a lot of management and executives both in business and IT, 39%. And then we had developers and architects, 33%, data scientists, 13%, and then other business sponsors and users, 3%. So a good kind of mixed representation from business and IT. And it was also quite varied across industries. Financial services was the biggest, 13%. So you can see, imagine that, or you can see here in our chart that it was quite varied. Geography, more than half, but just slightly more than half, 54% in the U.S. And then again, pretty diverse group there. U.S. tends to be, or North America tends to dominate our research, but we have 13% from Europe, Mexico, Central America, 7%, and then Australia, New Zealand, Africa, Asia, Middle East at smaller percentages. And then size by revenue, we have revenue and employees in the chart. We have employees. You can see that we had the largest share was in the 1,000 to just under 10,000, but we did have 35% who were over 10,000 and 10% at 100,000 or more employees. And looking at it differently by revenue, 16% at 10 billion or more in revenue, annual revenue, and 28% in the 1 to just under 10 billion in revenue. So again, kind of a diverse group, had a lot of large organizations, but probably the heart of it was more the mid-sized to large. All right, well, to talk about the topic and getting some background just about the idea of realizing value, I was sort of looking around for a good analogy, and of course a lot of folks in our industry use the idea of data as the new oil, and so I was curious where that phrase came from. The best I could tell, it came from Clive Humby, who is now chief data scientist at StarCount, but has been an important person, particularly in the UK, kind of analytics and data industries there for a long time. And he's given some credit for coining the idea that data is the new oil. And I found that Michael Palmer, who was quoting him, Executive Vice President, Member Relations with the Association of National Advertisers, he observed, which I think very valuably, that, okay, it is the new oil, and oil is valuable, but if unrefined, it cannot really be used. It has to be changed into gas, plastic, chemical, et cetera, to create a valuable entity that drives profitable activity. So the data must be broken down and analyzed for it to have value, and I think that's really key. And that's what we're about here in BI and analytics and all the kinds of related technologies, is refining it into something valuable, because the data itself is not typically valuable on its own. So there are a lot of key initiatives around and competitive advantages that are increasingly depending on that, as I mentioned, and the technologies and practices are moving fast in this area to improve that refinement. And it's coming from lots of different ends, the front end, the data integration, kind of semantic integration kind of end in terms of metadata, data preparation, other kinds of areas of advancement. But of course, the advancements are always challenging because the data is changing, the context is changing of how to use the data. These things are not just written in stone, and so expectations are changing. Patience, as I mentioned, is thinning, and agility, being able to do more than one thing or to change course, try something else, is very important. So, and these have been issues in a lot of BI and data warehousing systems in the past, as they have not been agile enough. So defining success, well, it's difficult to do because there's a lot of different ways to define success. But in looking at it, there's kind of traditional areas, and it's worth defining before we go forward, I think. And I'd mentioned here, it's difficult to assess because a lot of the true impact is downstream. A lot of organizations, they may get BI tools or analytics tools and be excited about the tool itself, but over time, of course, they're not so much excited about the tool and the technology, but they're excited about what is being done with it, what new result or improved result is occurring on the business side. So I think it's always good for organizations to kind of review what they can gain from these kinds of tools and whether they're actually seeing it. And so listing here some of the things that are key in most organizations that we see in our research: actionable information. That's one of the key. Does the system give users relevant information that they can apply depending on their roles and responsibilities, the decisions they need to make? Here's a case where, visualization, data visualization has been very important for making a lot of information more actionable. So that's a key criteria of whether BI and analytics tools and systems are delivering value. Single view of integrated data. We hear a lot of organizations, of course, pursuing this because they're faced with lots of data silos and disparate data, which is one of the key bottlenecks, as we certainly saw in our research for this report, one of the obstacles to gaining value. And so if they can create that kind of single view of the truth, even if imperfect, if they're moving toward it, the customer 360 view, for example, if it's about customer data. So it's, it's in some ways a chase that never really is done. I mean, because there's always more data and more different kinds of ways to look at it. And so it's not always easy to assemble that one single view, as it may have been with, say, enterprise BI reporting, as we move more into analytics and self-service. But in any case, that's still a very important goal and something that BI and data management can deliver. Productivity and efficiency. Can users do things where they're spending less time on tedious, mundane tasks? Can the tools automate some of the work? Can organizations examine their workflow to see if they can be doing things more efficiently and faster with less redundancy in terms of producing reports or developing analytical models, providing data access to users? In other words, can things be repeatable so they can easily repurpose them? Speed, very important. A lot of productivity, efficiency, of course, there's speed. Can you use the tools to reduce or shorten decision cycles? Can you make decisions faster? Is latency reduced in decision making? This is increasingly important, in circumstances where organizations have major online channels, for example, and need to react very fast to what customers or business partners are doing, or competitors for that matter. Autonomy. This is becoming increasingly important as we move, more and more into self-service kind of technologies. What can users do without IT help or constant hand-holding? Whether organizations are fully endorsing self-service or not, users need more autonomy to be able to do more on their own. They're always going to need guidance and mentoring, but this is an important goal. Communication and collaboration. Can users use the tools to communicate what their insights are, to see things faster and work in teams effectively around whether they be reports or visualizations, so that they can communicate the insights, apply them faster. And there's lots of concepts and practices building around this area, in particular data storytelling, something that we cover at TDWI conferences, providing communications capabilities so analysts and business users can do a better job of putting together the story, narrating the story, telling where the data came from, that kind of thing, so that everyone understands what they're talking about. Alignment with goals and strategies. This has long been a key goal for BI and analytics systems around performance management and scorecards and so forth. There was that sort of specific use case around methodologies there, but a lot of organizations are using the ideas more broadly, just to establish key performance indicators and metrics so they can see how they're doing, whether their daily activities and decisions fit into goals and strategies that they have set out, whether they be financial goals and strategies or corporate strategy, or things they're doing specifically around improving customer satisfaction or operational efficiency. There's lots of goals, KPIs, metrics, so it's important to have the ability to manage that well, to change them when they need to be changed, to examine whether they're really the best metrics or whether there are better ones. If organizations merge and acquire others, can we align these KPIs and metrics very easily, or does the whole thing have to be redone? I mean, so there's a lot there, and BI and analytics systems can be very helpful. And then finally, innovation. BI and analytics systems, as I mentioned before, organizations are determined to become more data-informed and analytics-driven, and develop that culture that can use data effectively, in many cases, to innovate, to come up with different kinds of product or service strategies, different ways of doing things, challenging that kind of way we've always done it, assumptions, the kind of gut assumptions, and if not replace, but at least enhance decision-making, that kind of decision-making with facts, so that organizations are working, in many cases, off the same set of facts to make decisions. So we asked organizations what they're doing and try to get in their own words, because this is really always very interesting to hear how users, in many cases, our respondents describe it. And so we have a few here that hopefully you can read underneath the type. Sorry again, sorry for running over. I think if you download the slides, they won't have this problem. I think it's just an issue with the presentation format. But in any case, we asked our respondents, in their own words, how would you describe whether the organization is successfully delivering value? And so we've got many responses. I just have a few here. And so the first says, it's about whether the business has the ability to make decisions as their needs change. It's about the 4 rights, and this is all very familiar to us in the BI and analytics industry. Do they have the right information at the right time, at the right form, and the right people? So I thought, to head it off, that's obviously a very good statement of what organizations are looking for. If reporting tools, metrics, and visualizations are providing accurate, actionable data, they're adding value to the organization. So again, restating some of the goals that I've mentioned. We measure on outcomes. As an organ and tissue transplant organization, we need to increase donors. Okay, there's the goal, donors, authorizations, and organs transplanted. Well, the metrics surrounding this are highly variable. BI is a success when we increase numbers in each category, so they're tracking that using BI. Analytics and BI projects are always part of our corporate IT portfolio. They have to follow a strict cost-benefit calculation and be justified from a business perspective if they are to be executed. They're not purely IT-driven. This is very interesting, as there's often the question, self-service versus IT-driven. And a lot of organizations, we certainly discovered in our research, this is a very good statement of what we often see, that it's always been part of the IT portfolio. And then finally, we use KPIs to measure the before and after of our BI systems implementation. And this is very interesting because actually a lot of organizations don't do that, but there are others that are very careful and are watching and have actually set up KPIs and metrics, as it states here, to see whether the BI systems are delivering on their value, which is quite interesting and something that I think a lot of organizations could adopt usefully. So also looked a little deeper at some case studies, and here we look at St. Mary's Bank and talked to Melissa Pomeroy, who's a Vice President of Business Information Systems at St. Mary's Bank, and she gave us some great insights into what they were doing, and they started with really a core systems replacement, a rip and replace, so that they could get to that single source of the truth and building around a data warehouse. And one of the things they did initially, and using Tableau on top of the data warehouse to do this, was really to kind of clean up the data, to get an understanding of what data we have and involve the users in that as well, and of course working with an outside consulting firm, which many organizations do. And so they created rules-based dashboards and supported departments work in data cleansing so that the bank can move to the next phase, which is what they wanted to get to, which is obviously using things like the dashboards and the analytics to really be able to look at the business, look at the competition, look at where they can make improvements and be better at meeting sales goals, for example, for each of their branches. And so I guess what I'm saying here is that they had to move first from using BI in kind of a little bit unorthodox way to clean up the data, and then using BI to actually improve business operations and improve their effectiveness in meeting outcomes. And so I have a quote here saying we wanted to step out of reporting and into true business intelligence, which is the second part. We wanted to provoke action and generate excitement. Now we're looking to infiltrate at the highest levels. Of course, a good phrase there for how they're trying to move BI and analytics more broadly across the organization. But I like that about provoking action and generating excitement. And that's certainly something that BI and analytics can deliver in organizations as users get to work with tools and work with data. Okay, so we looked in our research at the issue of reducing time to value quite a bit, and of course this is really core to acceleration. How can you reduce the time to value? And it is obviously critical. We found that 41% of research participants said their organizations are somewhat satisfied with the time to value of BI and analytics projects, and 10% very satisfied. So this is kind of a middling result. I guess it depends on how you look at it. Maybe it's a little higher than could have been expected, but it shows that there is a lot of room for improvement because 45% are in some ways unsatisfied. Then here we have a chart here showing that we looked at over the past 12 months. We asked, is the organization's newest BI and analytics projects delivering their intended value at a faster pace, about the same pace, or at a slower pace compared to previous 12 months? And so we see here that only 8% are delivering value much faster, somewhat faster, 35%. So again, that's not bad. So we've got approaching half are somewhat faster or much faster, but most are about the same, and then 19% slower. So a lot of the issues, when you read the report, again, I quoted kind of at length others about some of the obstacles they're facing, and I'm sure many of them will sound very familiar. But often as you move forward with BI and analytics, obstacles come up, and I think as we saw from the previous use case, often it's around the data quality, and just it takes a long time to pull that data, good data together, so you can really then move to the next levels with BI. So reducing time to value is never easy, and we can see some of these obstacles here. At the top of the list is really just around, it's not really technology or even the data, but around projects that are not well identified. And the project objectives and scope, and we can see here that multiple projects are not well prioritized. So a lot of issues there that are at the top of the list in terms of obstacles to reducing time to value. Then, of course, there's issues around not having enough skilled personnel, but data quality problems in terms of as we get to sort of the data issues, that's number one, or at the top of the data issues, I should say, number 4 in our list here, as we looked at them ordered by highest weighted score. And we can see here also cannot access relevant data, metadata, data definition. A lot of organizations, as they begin to try to put together multiple sources, that becomes a big problem. Business leadership not strong enough. We see that often that they want to lean kind of more on IT and are not participating consistently. Lack of tools, obviously. IT leadership, though. But this is interestingly not high on the list. A lot of organizations will say that IT processes and systems make it difficult, and so they move towards self-service. But here, actually, in this research group, it's not at the very top in terms of obstacles. But obviously, there are some things that IT can be doing better to move things along faster. And again, looking at some of what respondents said in a little more detail, as I mentioned in the report, there are more that you can read about this. I tend to write these things out at length because I think they're really interesting. But here we have, in terms of project scope, projects are slower due to lack of clarity. So those are issues. Slowed by lack of internal measurements. So as we mentioned before, some are using KPIs to track BI projects, so that can be helpful. So it makes it hard to course correct. But then on the positive side here, we have one quoted that there has been better agreement with the business units in the priorities for business, which has primarily been spearheaded by C-level teams, so at the top levels. And project funding has been better forecasted. So this shows what can happen when you have good alignment between the BI and IT teams and C-level teams on the business side. Personnel is always a big issue, not having skilled personnel, and a lot of we saw here in our research turnover. So turnover personnel and poorly defined and managed requirements have led to slower delivery cycle. But then on the positive side here, quoting that source system teams and BI teams are starting to work together. Business partners are prioritizing the demand based on resource limitations. So that's good to see good communication about what the organization can really do. Looking at a few more around data qualities, and so we saw there that that's a big issue. Quote here, our slower pace is due to having to explain increasing levels of anomalies found through analysis of the data. So often as organizations go through the data, they find more anomalies, which can in some ways slow them down. So they need good tools and automation to be able to move through that kind of stage of processes faster. tools are more scripted and velocity is high, data velocity is high, but the quality and integrity of the data points are being lost. So even as things like self-service and automation come in, still to pay attention to improving the quality and integrity of the data. But then on the positive side, projects are moving faster because we have better data quality, so they often really do go together. In terms of data access, preparation, and transformation, bigger and more complex the solution becomes, the more difficult it is to add new ETL and new applications to perform support processes. So complexity grows as things get bigger. But then on the positive side, we benefit from a strong data warehousing design, architecture, and infrastructure. With more data available in the data warehouse, more user data access problems are fixed. So a lot of organizations, even in the stage of Hadoop, sticking with their data warehouse strategy, and it's paying benefits there. And then project delivery is faster because we were able to leverage in-memory capabilities using established data sets to provide rapid prototypes and data integration on the fly. So using some of the newer technologies such as in-memory to improve project speed. So a lot of this is, we see, is what is the commitment to improving time to value and accelerating the path to value. And so what did we see here? Respondent organizations show a commitment to devoting, there's about 53% will spend more than the cost of the cheapest solution. So that was an interesting question. We asked how much they would spend beyond. But we did see that most organizations, many, will first try to push harder on existing resources. I'm sure we all know that. Before you get to spending more, there's always maxing out the existing resources. And so we asked in our survey for a hypothetical BI project to reduce time to results by half, please indicate which statement best fits what your organization would do. And we see here that 26% say they would spend nothing beyond the current project budget. So that kind of goes along with the push harder on existing resources. But actually, good percentages would do somewhat more. They'd add 10 to 25%, 35% would do that. 17% said they would add 25 to 50%. 7% consider even doubling the current project budget, and much smaller percentage, obviously just 2%, said they would do more than double. So you can sort of get a sense and probably match it up with what your organization would do if you had the promise to reduce time to results by half. What would be the level of investment? And so thinking about that in our research, we looked at a case study here that was around, we talked to Hemant Gagaram, a senior manager of BI and digital analytics and data governance at First Tech Federal Credit Union to see what they were doing to get the path moving faster. And so he really emphasized over and over again that really it starts with the business. As we saw, that business really can dictate a lot of the project parameters. Well, they really made a key focus on learning what challenges the business is trying to solve. So making sure the BI team is working very closely with the business leaders, including doing quarterly reviews to make sure that they're really on track and moving projects in the right direction. Because the whole company understands, as I quote him here, they're sitting on mines of data. They have more data than they can even know what to do with. And so they want to bring value not only to strategic decision making, but to the frontline employees who are engaged with credit union members. So improve the satisfaction with the membership. And so things they've been able to do is develop customized data sets for things like real-time tracking and delinquency and credit score monitoring so that the frontline employees know about this the right way. And then through those quarterly reviews, always looking at how can we provide the information better, how can we improve the data access. So as I quote Hemant here talking about they're lucky they have this executive commitment. And so we saw before that sometimes it can be kind of wavering on the business side, but how important it is to get that alignment from IT to project management to business engagement, that's foremost. So how does reducing time to value relate to a lot of other goals? I won't go through all of these because there's a lot of them here, but we can see that actually kind of mixes in with a lot of other goals here. And we saw that it's actually somewhat less important to reduce time to value than it is to increase the accuracy of the data reporting and analysis. So when kind of stacked up as where organizations want to invest, we found that it's somewhat more important for at least the majority of organizations we researched to try to improve the accuracy of the data reporting and analysis is about as important as improving visualization and ease of use. So if an organization is looking at reducing time to value, or do we invest in better visualization and ease of use, it's about the same. And about the same is enabling ad hoc reporting. Democratizing BI and analytics was somewhat less important than reducing time to value. Of course, all these things are kind of of a piece. They all fit together, because obviously if you can move forward on some of these areas, it will, as a byproduct, reduce time to value. But you can see here how this goal stacks up against some of the other goals that organizations are pursuing these days with BI and analytics projects. And we also want to look at satisfaction. So we asked how satisfied are organizations with the contribution of BI and analytics. And we can see here that the highest levels of satisfaction are around performance metrics. We have here, the chart is organized so that the highest combined very satisfied and somewhat satisfied responses are at the top. And so we can see here that identifying, managing metrics, evaluating business decisions and strategies is second, so fairly strong satisfaction for that, but not as high for a lot of customer-related objectives, which is interesting. So things like providing actionable customer intelligence, well, that actually was number 4, but there's a lot of others, as you can see through this list, moving down to just 11% very satisfied with providing actionable customer intelligence, so the kind of information that frontline employees in sales, service, and support could use. So there's a lot of room for improvement there. So seeing across the board where satisfaction is high and low. And a lot of organizations are also looking at how they can monetize and create data-driven services. And so right now, could be due to some degree to inexperience, but they're struggling with that, not creating as much value there. Okay, so as I mentioned before, it's very difficult sometimes to say, well, how is BI and analytics contributing to the organization, because a lot of the impact is downstream. So we wanted to ask, do organizations measure or recognize that contribution to the downstream contributions, in other words, of BI and analytics? Sort of a complex question in some ways, but we wanted to see what they do. And so we found out that for some of these, they actually do recognize it. So 26% do recognize that giving the right users the right information at the right time. So the classic goal of BI, they do this for nearly all projects. So if it has accomplished that goal, which is really sort of a basic goal of BI systems in particular, then they do recognize that they are gaining value from those systems, and 46% do it for some. Reducing the time it takes to complete business projects. As I mentioned, listed all the sort of major goals of BI and analytics earlier. These are among them. So 65% recognize this downstream impact for some or all of their projects. Providing data insights that increase customer, partner, or stakeholder value. So this is a good way of seeing, did our BI and analytics systems, did they contribute to this? And so 75% actually recognize the connection between the use of the BI and analytics projects and the increase in customer, partner, or stakeholder value. And so there's more. Increasing success of transactions and reducing the number of complaints. A little over half are recognizing BI and analytics projects and how they contribute to that. And reducing business risk and exposure, however, much lower, at least at this point. 27% of organizations said they actually rarely measure this connection between the use of BI and analytics and the projects and business risk and exposure. And it may be that we saw that that's actually down the list of uses for BI and analytics currently, often because it's so much specialized. So let's look at another user story. We also looked at, we talked to Sylvain Leborn, who's Executive Vice President of Data Systems at Havas Media, and talking about how to get some of that downstream impact. And they're looking at higher client satisfaction. Havas, a gigantic media company based in Europe, and so they're deep into digital media and creating, and which of course creates a lot of diverse data. And so as an issue, try to combine online and offline advertising data to improve execution across channels. So again, looking at do those BI and analytics systems contribute to that goal of improving execution across channels. So what the organization did is they have clients, and the clients wanted access to data, and they wanted access to immediate access to data. But Havas really had a lot of value add to provide there, and so they needed to make sure that that was happening as fast as in order to keep pace with the client need for the data. So they're able to use BI and analytics systems and really a lot of expertise and excellence in their projects to enable those recommendations to happen at the kind of speed and also with the personalization for each client that they needed to be competitive. So they're able to provide the single point of entry to lots of data, using tools to provide easy preparation of the data, so the data scientists don't have to waste their time. They're using Unify in this case to provide that, and so they're reducing a lot of the time, and that way reducing the delays in time to value. So I quote him here as saying, "We wanted to be sure the clients access something where we prepare and process the data for them rather than just be an interface, or rather than have to interface their IT with our IT. Clients want more than just access." So providing that business value very immediately right there. Okay, so let's look at some things that organizations are doing to take action to accelerate time. Well, obviously, a good first step is to just look at how is it going right now. Can we measure how long development, testing, and deployment cycles are currently taking? And so our research we see that it varies. Obviously, projects are not all the same. They have different kinds of demands, but just 2% said they could do it in 2 days or less. But then on the other side of the spectrum, 2% said it took 12 months or more. And so obviously the larger results were kind of in the middle of the curve there. 15% can begin providing value in 2 weeks or less. 70% can do it in under a month. 12% need 4 to 6 months, and 5% up to a year. And as I mentioned before, 2% over a year. As all these systems democratize, there's lots of new kinds of demands, new requirements. They may include also unstructured data, bringing in new kinds of skills, technology and skill sets around Hadoop, for example, bringing in new kinds of front ends. So there's lots of change, and these are kind of things that can either lengthen or in many cases, hopefully, shorten, ultimately, some of the decision cycles. And, of course, the obvious step there is to understand what's going on now and how each of these kinds of new technologies could improve a certain phase of a development in the development of a project. But growing participation of stakeholders is very important. And as I mentioned earlier, a lot of it we see in our case studies is really make or break for a lot of these projects. And so what is their role typically? We looked at and saw that allocation of funding and approving budgets is the most common. 65% said that's the business stakeholder involvement. 38%, so almost 40%, are involved in mapping out project starting points and intended deliverables. You'd think they'd be quite involved in that. 61% defining the questions to be explored in BI and analytics projects, and so forth. So we can see some of the involvement of business stakeholders. We also see, obviously important, that stakeholders be involved in organizational and government processes, governance process, I should say, so that governance is dealt with both on the business and IT side. Typically, IT takes leadership with governance, and so it's important to make sure business is aware and working effectively. All right, let's see. So in terms of steps that organizations are taking to take action to reduce time to value, we saw that the most prevalent was, again, around projects. Define and follow strategy that aligns project with corporate objectives. So a lot of sort of project-oriented issues, as we saw earlier, that is actually the main thing that slows down projects. So it's good to see that organizations are seeing that also as where they should go first to address issues around reducing time to value. They're not doing as much with Agile as I think we expected, at least in terms of Agile workshops, although we do see that they are forming Agile method teams and giving users product iterations to test. So a lot of organizations are not doing the full Agile method implementation, but are taking off pieces of it. And that in particular is one using, in many cases, self-service tools to provide those kind of iterations so that they can get some incremental value and get feedback from users more quickly and feed that into the work of the Agile development teams. So you can see here, probably in the sake of time, I'll move forward, but how these add up and compare to what your organization is doing to reduce time to value. So one of the key things, and particularly in the self-service age, to move forward is to encourage guidance from the BI teams. But we saw here that that's actually not happening as much as it should be happening really in organizations. So we asked, do the BI teams and development experts provide guidance to users as they move towards self-service? And really just 29% said yes very often. 25% said if requested on a project basis, which can work fine in organizations. Then it moves on to 18% only when users work with IT-managed data sources, so the enterprise data warehouse. In other words, if they're working with their own data, they're kind of on their own. 15% actually there's no regular guidance, and 12% said that their power users inside the departments provide guidance, not IT business teams. So there's still a lot of good communication that can happen there, and mentoring and guidance that can be helpful in those projects. So along with things like improving the projects, particularly as organizations move into more self-service implementation, it's important to get that communication working as well. So one thing we see here, particularly in analytics, is that analytics are often difficult to interpret. So it's different from BI reports, just basically giving a data dump or a fancy visualization is basically a report. But what happens when analytics, with all the kind of going back and forth and interpretation, which are not easy to interpret, what happens then? And this is where things like mentoring and guidance can be very important to users who may be unfamiliar with working with data and working with particular data sources and analytics. So what are organizations doing? Well, the majority bring in experts from within the business to potentially illuminate the results. So they are reaching out in the organization, 56%. Bringing experts from outside, 26% are doing that. Somewhat common, as we saw in our more anecdotal research, except that some results are risky and execute on them, and if unprofitable, reject the results. So still doing kind of a test and learn, going through it, but this can be very time-consuming. But 26% doing that. Wait for more data in hopes of a clearer result. About the same percentage set of small-scale business experiments to test the results. Again, do more testing, which is sort of very common with analytics. Ignore results that are too vague or difficult to interpret. Of course, sometimes you can be throwing out things that could be interesting in that process. And then, of course, we ask someone tongue-in-cheek, we never have difficulty with our data. What are you talking about? But only 9% said that they don't do that or diffident in that respect. So we can see here that a lot of organizations are reaching out in the organization to try to understand analytical results, bring in subject matter experts to help interpret the results. Thinking again of governance, what is its role? I mentioned it earlier. What is governance? It's a lot of things, but it's really about guarding sensitive data, how it's being used, how it's being analyzed in the organization, setting up rules, processes, and policies, often in accordance with regulations. So we asked, how important is it? Well, I should say at first that we did see that 52% saw that governance users in the organization regard it as a hindrance. In other words, it's restraint on what they can do, and just 12% see it as helpful. Of course, really, once governance is clear and in place, it actually can be helpful to projects because it allows the users and IT and everyone working with data to know the boundaries, know what they can do with the data. They know what the policies are, so it doesn't obstruct projects later or even end projects, as we've seen in many cases. And so we ask here, what are they doing and how important is it to realizing value? And we can see at the top list, implementing data security rules and policies was the most important. Down at the bottom, and probably because we've seen in other research, not a lot of organizations are documenting their governance, which they really should be doing, but documenting data provenance, recording what influences or changes data over time is actually regarded here as less important. It can be quite important. It's probably that they're not doing it as much. So here again, you might want to look at to measure it against what your organization is doing in terms of governance. Look at a quick user story around governance. We did ask. We do anonymous interviews of organizations that don't want to mention who they are. This is a common problem in every organization, not just government agencies, but they're data rich and information poor. But they found that in developing, they needed to develop a data governance structure. They ran immediately into political and politics and kind of communication challenges. Managers were assigning people to handle governance without thinking about their skill sets. So there's a lot of chaos in the organization that they had to deal with. And BI tools users want them immediately, but not really understanding, as I quote him here, is saying people hear BI tool and they want to get to play with the tool. They don't really realize it's not just a tool, but it's a cultural change. It's an initiative. And sometimes that can be many users' minds is something that's going to slow things down. But attention to governance and gathering and managing metadata effectively and correctly, building those sort of cultural support around BI is very important to success. Looking a little bit more into the technology priorities, and we asked kind of diving down into what organizations do or what users do with BI tools and where they're confident in what they're doing, and this way can see where they may need to make improvements. So users are most confident. We asked how important is the goal of accelerating progress toward realizing business value to the how I'm getting tongue twisted here. How important are these capabilities for realizing the value? And so drilling down, slicing, and dicing data is at the top, and users are doing that most with their tool. That's probably most common anyway. Ad hoc visual data discovery. So these are things that are at the top of the list of what's important. Where organizations might want to consider investing are some of the areas towards the bottom that can be very helpful in terms of accelerating data access, accelerating access to things like raw and unstructured data, if applicable in organizations providing mobile functionality and performance. These are kind of things that can accelerate progress toward realizing business value if they are necessary for the certain use case. And so we can see there, in another research question we asked what user confidence was in the completeness and timeliness of data. As we saw earlier, data quality can be an issue, and only 9% are actually very confident in the ability to access the data when they need it, so not just in the quality, but even their ability to access it. So behind these results are some lack of confidence in that capability. All right, let's look at one more quick use case here. We asked Danny Sama, who's Director of Analytics in Northwestern Medicine, about what they're doing in terms of balancing self-service and standardization. And they're, awash in KPIs. So they have 300 to 400 KPIs around operational units. They needed to set up governance, curation, and ongoing user support to really manage the whole process. So they, get my notes together here. So what was important to them really was to create a goods foundation, metadata foundation, using even understanding building a semantic layer basically to unify governance, metadata, management, improving data access to multiple sources that way, being able to say that they have good curated data sets that they're providing for the users. And this is what's going to be an enabler to allow them to move from what they have now is 90% BI and 10% analytics to more capability around analytics. But the point that Danny made very effectively is that it's very important to balance self-service and standardization, so balance self-service and governance, balance self-service and standardization around metadata, so they can answer things like ad hoc questions. So here I quote him as saying their help desk is really in charge of handling the ad hoc questions. So they're trying to move to a model where there's a help desk whose job is literally just to answer ad hoc questions the same day, so faster service, and help increase adoption of self-service. And he's very excited about that. So using better methods and unifying the standardization and self-service capabilities there. Okay, again, looking at some of the data access strategies for data access and interaction, we asked which of the following is the organization currently enable or plan to enable to facilitate access, interaction with their analysis of data. And so we're looking at big data here, which of course is a very important direction for many organizations. And is this really helping them get to data faster? So we looked at this, and actually it's fairly traditional in terms of how they're accessing the data through data connectors using ODBC and JDBC kind of standards. So that's, as to be expected, how most organizations are getting to their data. But we did see a lot of other kinds of technologies being used to get to the data faster and provide broader access. And so search engines and natural language processing, we can see here that they're going to be expansion here is more organizations are planning to do so within 1 to 3 years. In a lot of these sorts of technologies, 37% in fact plan to use semantic graph query engines, which is interesting. So you can see these results sort of in the lower half here. Where there's not much being used right now, we'll see faster in the future. And we saw in an earlier case, in-memory database technologies is an important technology to bring more data closer to users and allow for more varied analytics faster on that data. And we do see here that that is expected to grow with, around 40% or so, planning to do it within 1 year or within 1 to 3 years. So you can see here, and again, measured against what kind of technologies your organization is looking at to accelerate value and what kind of technologies are important. Okay. And one of those technologies, of course, is around the data integration layer, the semantic layer, the metadata integration. And this is, again, an area we see in our research quite a bit that comes up that can make it difficult for organizations to move forward because it just becomes so hard to integrate data and provide single views of lots of different and diverse data sources. And so we asked here, which of the following data integration, metadata integration, semantic integration technologies are you using or planning to use? Data integration technologies as the ODBC and JDBC kind of connectors would be a good example. Is dominant because it's embedded in most organizations in terms of BI and data warehousing. But other things like master data management, a little more than half are currently or planning to use this. Tools to create metadata, maintain metadata models. We're seeing a lot of new technology being applied to that in terms of machine learning and other AI techniques to make that faster and more automated. And we have, in fact, machine learning technology to discover metadata. 22% are already using technologies that have that. And then, as I mentioned, we expect to see some growth moving forward in things like semantic web technologies and more advanced use of natural language processing and ontology and things like that. Here we see 15% are currently doing or plan to enable for users this sorts of technology. Okay, I know we're getting had a lot of material to run and we've kind of come up on the hour, so let me get through these recommendations quickly. So we did see that project objectives and scope, that's often the number one thing the organizations feel they need to address to move faster, and it's a good place to start. Matching project and workflows with user decision cycles. In other words, what are users trying to do? Get the business people involved. There are the obvious areas where business people are involved, but sometimes less obvious that get kind of down into the project, defining the questions they want to ask. What are they going to be doing with it? The more that can be aligned, the faster projects can go. And then taking steps to reduce time to value. Falling short is obviously something that can make BI and analytics less valuable, and so business and IT leaders should make it a priority to streamline development, streamline those projects to move forward faster. And we saw in some of our case studies the use of metrics to determine whether BI and analytics are delivering value. So metrics on that alone can be very helpful in organizations. That would be a good place to look. Aim for managed and governed self-service BI and analytics and data preparation. You might look at other TDWI resources. We've done a lot of webinars and other kinds of materials around how to improve data preparation, for example, and other aspects of self-service BI and analytics for more detail about this. But self-service is a big, major trend. It's not going to go away, but it needs to be stewarded, governed effectively. Governance policies need to be updated so that they're not based on centralized kind of IT-centric models, but understand that self-service is going to be growing and the governance policies need to adapt. Another big recommendation is operationalize. So operationalize BI and analytics, strengthen the connection between insight and action. So again, understanding what the users are going to be doing, making the data analytics actionable for those use cases should be a priority. KPIs, again, they're helpful. Are the BI and analytics, are they helping operationalize? Are they helping us move the insights that we're gaining through analytics projects to more operationalized postures that we're using them, and have they been effective? Streamline processes so that the repeatable workflows, so a lot of the kind of redundancy is reduced in the workflows around this, and this is particularly important as users move towards self-service. In many cases, you don't want the users reinventing the wheel. They want to be using things effectively. In improved communication, we saw that communication is very important, and it's at the top of the list in a lot of our research. Organizations can struggle, particularly as they get into more complex and advanced analytics, to interpret it, resorting to a lot of trial and error, which can take time and add a lot of redundancy. There could be better ways, and particularly around using data storytelling to communicate the analytics, see where the analytics may have fallen short, explaining what's been done and what could be done better. And then finally, of course, addressing personal and skill set deficiencies is very important. All right, Linda, well, I think that's all I've got, so I think we can move on to audience questions. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dave. A lot of good information there. Yeah, let's grab a few audience questions here. I'm going to run over a little so we can get some of these in here. Here's an interesting one on that inherent conflict between the business side and the IT side. Someone says, I've seen firsthand what happens when business loses patience in dealing with IT-managed systems, and one of the things that resulted is business users writing code on their own. So what happens when business kind of seizes the reins in that way, and do you have any advice on what to do?
Yeah, I think that's a real good point, and it goes on, and it can be difficult because IT isn't using their time-honored or well-honed, I should say, processes to test code, and a lot of things that users don't really understand, particularly the sort of testing procedures that most IT projects and applications go through before their users are allowed to work with them, at least in a production way. And so this has become a real point of tension in a lot of organizations because users just don't seem to understand that, and so they start to write their own code, and that's where things like governance and stewardship are incredibly important because their BI teams and IT can point out the potential dangers of just using this because it could lead to erroneous results if it's not done correctly, and also a lot of kind of code that is hard to fix if there are issues. Now, of course, what's happening too is that there's a lot of automation in development tools, and in, as I mentioned, metadata and areas like that. The connection between the ability to access metadata to manage it effectively, and so that's going to play a larger role in development projects and should improve that aspect of development projects. And so I guess what I'm saying is I think there's help on the way on the technology side, but it is a difficult issue because obviously the other problem is that when whoever wrote the code goes away, is gone, then that leaves the business department usually with code that they don't know how to, they don't know the innards, they can't really work with it, and so if it needs to be rewritten, it needs to be completely rewritten, which can be a huge time-consuming project. So, yeah, I think it's a difficult issue. I'm not sure I gave you a great answer as to what to do, except that business and IT should be communicating about some of the potential dangers, along with the benefits of being able to move faster. But it could be a way for business and IT personnel to begin to work together to say, well, let's not do it this way. Let's find a different way to do it that might be more effective.
Mm-hmm. Well, along those same lines, here's another question, another tough situation often in these companies. What role does the culture of an organization play in the adoption of a new analytics solution? And can you affect that culture? Can you change it?
Yeah, I think the culture is incredibly important. And there's a lot of signposts of what puts together a good culture. And one is around obviously the focus on business outcomes and contribution, and that's why we really looked at our research quite in detail about, do you measure the downstream impact of BI and analytics on the business goals, the outcomes, or is that connection kind of lost? Because a lot of organizations we see that is lost. They forget what the contribution was of the projects, and so the danger there, of course, everybody wants credit for the good things, so that's good. But it's also that it's hard to track back how they can make changes or fix things or create better BI and analytics applications that maybe better serve what the users are trying to do. And all those things are the kind of things that are a good culture can support, because they're looking at the effectiveness of the BI and analytics tools constantly. They're using things like KPIs and metrics to see if what the project was supposed to deliver really did deliver, and to what extent it did. And then there's issues around innovation. So are the tools being used for innovation, and is that innovation being communicated effectively around the organization so that kind of thing is supported in the organization more broadly, so it's not just sort of one person doing something over in a corner and not really affecting things throughout the organization, or in other words, not really using it to build a culture that is working effectively with analytics and seeing the potential of it and trying to improve processes and projects. So I think those are important. And governance can play a key role in that development of the culture, because it defines better what organizations can do currently in terms of within regulations and policies with the data. But it unifies with stewardship, so it brings in these ideas of mentoring and communication and a flow of expertise from those who are more experienced to those who are less experienced. And this is very important, particularly as self-service kind of grows in organizations. And somebody's addressing that last question. That kind of thing is so important to developing that culture to move everyone along, so it's not just a few.
Yeah, thank you. Those are good questions, tough challenges out there. So thank you, Dave. Again, that was Dave Stauder with TDWI, our speaker today. I want to thank our sponsors as well, both for underwriting today's webinar as well as the Best Practices Report that this was based on. Again, you can download that report for free. That's Dave Stauder's work, and there's a lot more information on today's topic. So go to the website, tdwi.org, for that report. I also want to remind everyone that we did record today's webinar, so if you'll be getting an email later today with a link to the archive. If you want to pass that along to colleagues, please feel free to do that. And finally, a quick reminder that TDWI offers a wealth of information, including the latest research, reports, on-demand webinars, and information on business intelligence, data warehousing, and a host of related topics. I encourage you to tap into all of that expertise. It's at tdwi.org. And from all of us here today, thank you very much for attending. This concludes today's event.